Hi, welcome to Beyond Politics. I'm Catherine Clark. The Honourable Mr. Justice Richard Wagner is the most junior member of the Supreme Court of Canada, appointed by Prime Minister Stephen Harper in 2012. He was a successful litigator and judge for the Quebec Court of Appeal, following in the footsteps of his father, Claude Wagner, who himself was a lawyer, judge, and justice minister for the province of Quebec. Richard Wagner joins me now to talk about life on the bench of Canada's top court. Mr. Justice Richard Wagner, welcome to Beyond Politics. It's great to have you here.
My pleasure.
Can you recall for me your first time inside a courtroom?
My first time inside a courtroom was when I was 7 years old. And my father, and I remember like it was yesterday, my father brought me to the courthouse in Montreal, which is now the Court of Appeal. And he brought me there for the first time. I was 7 years old, and I saw this building, very prestigious building, very impressive building. And of course, it was not for me that was going there, but it was because my father was then a justice of the Sessions Court in Montreal. So that was my first time in a courthouse in all my life.
Did you think that you would end up, was it impressive enough that you thought, this is what I want to do with the rest of my life? Or as a kid, were you just like, wow? No,
as a kid, I think that I was impressed by the surroundings and the majestic nature of the building. You know, it was a building whose architecture was designed by Ernest Cormier, who was the same architect who designed the Supreme Court of Canada. So you can imagine the building. It was very nice. My taste or my desire to become a lawyer came a little bit later on.
I remember when I was a little girl that my mom was a lawyer, and I thought that only women could be lawyers, and I was quite insulted that anyone would suggest that men could be lawyers too. But it's interesting in terms of how kids see the world through what they see their parents doing. And you were exposed as a child to a father who had a very successful career as a lawyer, as a judge, as a politician, as a senator. Did you think early on that you would follow that path? Was it of any interest to you at all? Because a lot of kids turn the exact opposite direction, but you didn't.
Yeah. No, I did not, because I liked the idea of eventually becoming a lawyer. As a grown-up, a youngster, I like to debate. I like the idea of pushing ideas ahead, and to confront others and to win an argument. So it was like a bit natural in a way, you know. And I always wanted to become a litigation lawyer. That's for sure. So, of course, I saw my father. I saw him as a lawyer. I saw him as a judge. I saw him as, politician, Minister of Justice, but it only encouraged me in going into law.
It sounds like you were a terrific kid. You liked to confront and to argue and to. Did you wear your parents down?
Not really. I had my limits, and I knew theirs. So no, I was. I think I would say a regular, normal kid, and with the plus and minus and qualities and defaults, but I like to argue. I must say, I like to argue.
Did your mom like it that you liked to argue?
Well, she was a bit like me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Was she?
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. She was the one in the house that was making sure that things were done.
Right.
And so.
I guess she had to be. Your dad was pretty busy outside of the house.
Yeah. Very often my dad was outside the house. And my mother sometimes also. I was fortunate enough, in a way, when I was born during the same year. My grandfather on my mother's side died the same year. So my grandmother became a widow, and my mother was her lonely child. So my parents asked my grandmother to live with us. So from day one, I had two mothers. And I never really made a difference because my grandmother was such a good woman and a good heart, and she was there at home every day, whereas sometimes my mother, had to attend social events with my father and had to go trips abroad and so on and so forth. But my grandmother was the one who was taking care of us at home.
You're pretty lucky because in my experience, grandmothers are a little more indulgent than mothers may be. They may spoil a little.
You're
little
so
more
right. That's what happened. That's what happened.
Yeah.
So that's why maybe I remember.
That's why you had such a happy childhood.
Maybe that's the reason why. Maybe.
You talked about wanting to become a litigation lawyer. Why? What was it about that particular field that interested you?
That's a good question. I think that's probably because I felt that litigation lawyer had access to different type of law. And I remember when I was finishing my law degree at Ottawa U here in Ottawa, I wanted to argue. I wanted to litigate cases. So I was looking for a firm which would give me the opportunity to litigate in various different files. And because I was curious. I was curious to know. And litigation gives you that opportunity because I was involved in several types of litigation, and every time you become a specialist in a different field, whether it be, professional liability as an accountant, architect, engineers, or for a bank, or you become a specialist in one different matter every time.
So it's like a different day of work, essentially.
Yeah, and you get additional information, training, and that's why I found it so interesting.
Is it true that you once argued before the Supreme Court?
Yes.
What happened in the case?
Well, I had a few cases. The last one was the one that I argued in 1995 or 96, I think. It was one of the good case I had for many reasons. It was an insolvency case, and I was acting for a real estate owner who had interest in some commercial buildings with a big corporation, which became insolvent. And I will spare you the details, but it was a matter of insolvency, and it was, he didn't have much means, but the big bank had the means, and they could argue the case. And we had won before Superior Court, and we had lost badly before the Court of Appeal. And then, we had to decide whether we would try to go to the Supreme Court. But to go to the Supreme Court, you have to, it's costly, and it takes some time. And for my client, he could become bankrupt if he didn't win that case. So I was convinced that we would win that case. But first we had to obtain the leave to appeal and then to plead the case on the merit. So I had a special arrangement with my clients. Although my partners were reluctant to have this agreement, they accepted that I would charge no fees for filing the leave to appeal. And if we would be successful, then it would be the usual standard agreement. And we had the leave to appeal. I was able to convince this court that it was a matter of national importance, in matter of insolvency. And at the end, we won 5-0 on the merit. So for my client, of course, he became a good friend also since that time. And I think that for justice, it gave me so much enthusiasm for the court, but also for the judicial system.
Did you ever lose before the court, this court?
This court?
Yes.
No. In those days, 1983, I presented a motion for leave to appeal. In those days, you had to attend the court to present motion. Now it's on file. And we won also. But you know, winning or losing, I mean, for a litigation lawyer, you win some and lose some. And for me, a lawyer that doesn't never lose a case is not a real litigation lawyer.
Do you remember what you felt the first time that you came to the Supreme Court to argue?
Oh boy, that was in 1983.
You would have been, I mean,
3
you're
years of
still very
practice.
young, but I was going to say you would have
Thank you very
been
much.
quite young.
I was,
An infant.
Well, almost, if you say so. Well, I was 3 years into the practice, so I was, in fact, pretty young. And when my senior partner knew that I would attend the Supreme Court to, mind you, it was not a case on the merit; it was a leave to appeal. But they were a bit nervous, and you know, but they let me go. I was lucky enough to practice in a law firm, which gave me a lot of opportunity to argue cases. Even as an articling student, I had my first trial at the provincial court, Court of Appeal also, and Superior Court. So it was rare in those days. So to answer your questions, your question, I was very nervous. I didn't sleep all night, even though it was only a motion for leave to appeal. So, you know, there's some. It goes with the institution, goes with the nature of the case, and the fact that I was maybe 26 years of age, and you argue before the Supreme Court.
Do you ever think of that when you are sitting on the bench here at the Supreme Court and you see lawyers who may never have been here before, young lawyers come in to argue before you? Does that, do you remember those days? Does that factor into how you might treat them?
Rightly or wrongly, you're absolutely right. I always think about that. And I'll tell you why. I found that when I came to the Supreme Court, it was probably the easiest court to plead before. In a way that people are very noble, people are very generous, it's very civilized, nobody will shout at you. And I always believed, whether it be Supreme Court, Court of Appeal, or Superior Court, there are no reasons why judges should not be careful and be nice with lawyers and individual citizens. And I remember my days as a litigation lawyer, whether it be in Superior Court, Court of Appeal, or the Supreme Court of Canada. And it's so important that judges be civilized and welcome, whether it be young lawyers or older lawyers or citizens, with the proper way.
Let's take a few steps back to when you were first appointed to the court. You're in Quebec. You had been, as you've described, you've had a very interesting career as a litigator. Did you want to sit as a judge? Was that something that was of interest to you? Because I have to imagine that the work is significantly different.
Well, you know, you would have told me a few years ago that I would be appointed as a justice of the Supreme Court, and we would share a good laugh. I never thought about that. I was never seeking that position. The only thing I would tell you is that as a lawyer, I knew that one day I would like to become the arbiter. I would like to become the referee as a Superior Court.
Right.
But
can I ask you why? Why did you know that?
Because for me it was the reasonable and normal way of giving back to the law profession and society all the skills that I got during 25 years of practice. It was a normal way to be useful at one point in time in his life. I didn't know it was after 25 years or 20 years or 30 years, but I knew that eventually that would be the right thing to consider. But never, and I don't think that anybody could seriously pretend that he or she would seek a position as Supreme Court Justice. I don't think that's realistic. But events come by, and first thing I knew, eventually in 2009 or 10, I was offered a position at the Court of Appeal. I was not seeking that position. And the same happened at the Supreme Court. And then it's a different, it's a different scenario. And when there's the possibility to serve as a Justice of the Supreme Court, I think that part of it is a civic duty as well. I mean, there are so few of us who have the chance, opportunity eventually to contribute to what society will be in the future. You have to think seriously before saying no. I said yes.
Were you worried? Were you nervous when you said yes?
Yes, I was anxious.
Yeah.
The unknown, of course, and the task, and the responsibility. And but at the same time, I was also thrilled with the challenge to know other things, to be able to contribute with my experience, my knowledge, my moral values, and so it was a mixed feelings. But I'm the happiest man in the world today.
What happened the first time that you put on the lovely red robe? Did you feel, is it heavy? Is it?
It is heavy.
It is.
Kind of warm also.
Well, I was going to ask if it's hot. It looks really hot.
My granddaughter, Juliette, loved it very much.
I bet, because it's soft, isn't it?
Yeah, I looked like Santa Claus
of course,
as well.
Of course, it's a dream come true.
She had the real one. And so, no, but it's part of the history and tradition. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Was your family here when you were appointed, sworn in, I suppose? Presented,
because I was sworn in many weeks before,
yes.
Because I was appointed in early October, and I beginning to sit on a case a couple of days later.
Yes, Justice LaBelle was telling us about the pre-Christmas delivery of all the books, which he thought was a Christmas.
It can come very fast, very quickly.
So you found the same thing. It was right away.
Well, maybe that's the best way to do it.
I suppose.
Do it right.
Yes,
right
just
after
get thrown into it.
So I was presented many weeks after in the ceremony, formal ceremony, and
yes.
Of course, my children were there. I have 2 children, a son, Charles, and Catherine. Beautiful name.
Isn't it?
You cannot disagree on that.
No, or Charles. Charles, c'est le nom de mon fils.
Really?
Yes.
Oh, well,
yeah.
Got
so there you
great taste.
Yes.
Self-serving evidence. And they were there, and I was very proud that they were there with me, and it was a very nice ceremony.
Yeah. Your parents had both passed away by that point. You must have been thinking about them then on that day as well, because, I mean, obviously they would have been just so tremendously proud of you. Did you reflect on that as you were there?
Oh yeah, maybe some people will think I'm nostalgic, and they're probably right. But my father died at he was 54, so I'm older than when my father died, and my mother at 60. So I was not fortunate on that aspect, and I must tell you that I think of my parents almost every day, and my father was a source of influence, and whenever I have something difficult to do, I think about him. It gives me some strength and willingness to go ahead.
Have you modeled yourself in any way after either of your parents?
I wouldn't say that way, but I think that they taught me some strong values, like work. I saw them go through difficult periods, great periods as well. But politics could be very difficult sometimes, And that's why we were a very close-knit family, and you need each other. And but I always kept in my mind those values of hard work, to be curious. And with those values, you know, I think that I owe them those values, basically. So that's why, for me, it's only natural that I think of them very often.
You have been a great proponent of transparency on the court. But another element is that I think when many Canadians tend to think of the Supreme Court, they think of it as a very old institution with potentially old justices sitting removed making a decision. That's not the case. But you very particularly prove that that's not the case. You are young. You have open opinions. You feel that the court needs to be more transparent. Why do you think that that's important for Canadians to see?
Well, I think that's one way of convincing Canadians that the court is going along with society, and it's not an institution which is irrelevant. It is relevant, and it goes along with what society lives. And I think that if the court could be, I think, but remain transparent, and if the justices on the court don't hesitate to address a few words to the people when the occasion arises, I think it's part of this exercise to make sure that the citizens of this country will still believe that the court is relevant, is efficient, and is important also in their daily life.
Did you have preconceived notions when you arrived here at the court? Did you think it would be one way or another in particular, and it didn't turn out to be that way?
That's a good question, because really I didn't know. I knew a few justices for having met them on occasions, but I was not aware of the functioning of the court itself. So I had my own idea, and I have to tell you frankly that I was so enthusiastic in meeting each of my colleagues. I would not say relieved, but I was comfortable with what I saw and and the people I met, and that proves that you know, there are good reasons why justices should be known outside the court. And if I had the occasions to meet with them before, I would have had this impression and this appreciation before. So I think it's important, and I was very happy when I joined the court.
We've talked, well, in terms of the hearings that happen in the court, and then you conference after the court. You are a very collegial group of people, it seems to be, but you're also people who are accustomed to making decisions and sticking to them, and probably to being fairly competitive in the fields that you worked in prior to becoming justices of the Supreme Court. What is it like when you're dealing with each other in a room where you're hashing out a decision? Is it a pleasant place to be? Can it be difficult for you?
It is a very pleasant place to be, but it's the nature of the beast to have strong personalities, I would say. You know, my colleagues are great legal minds. They have experience. I hope they would say the same thing for me. I can only think and talk about the others. Okay. So so therefore, you know, it's normal to have strong opinions. We have experience, and it's normal that sometimes we exchange ideas in a firm way. But everybody is respectful. We have nothing to prove to each other. I mean, we're sitting on the same court. We have our own background, have our own training, our own values, culture, language issues, and I think there's a lot of respect. That's the main ingredient in order to mix the different ideas and opinions. And I think that the Chief Justice was very useful in that task as well.
You talked, you get here very early in the morning. You get here, I mean, earlier than some people wake up.
Depends on the day, but yeah, sometimes.
Do you manage to maintain any semblance of a life outside of the court?
I try to. You know, I love sports, and I try to...
Do you mean you like watching sports, or do you like participating in?
Participate in it. Okay. I'm a golf maniac.
Okay.
Mind you, since I became a judge in 2004 in Superior Court, I've never played so few times.
Is that because no one wants to play with you?
That's it.
Is
Probably.
It?
No.
No, because I mean, who would normally be your golfing?
No, but
would they be lawyers? Would they
well,
be
that's it. You know,
worried about beating you?
Well, you have to be careful yourself,
of course,
right, to play with.
I'm sure, in
the
all
right
seriousness,
persons.
that you do.
But no, I had my friends, and but the thing is that as a lawyer, you have better control of your time schedule. Whereas when you become a judge, whether it be a trial division or Supreme Court, you don't control your agenda so much. I mean, and you don't spend days with clients, and so you don't play as much as I used to play.
Right.
But I try to, because it's one way to relax and unwind, and it's one of my favorite sports.
Do you read anything besides judgments?
I read sometimes. I always read. I'm a fan of newspapers, magazines, read a good book sometimes. That could be relaxing.
You don't go home and watch Law and Order?
Maybe I should.
What kind of an impact, and this is probably a final question, but what kind of an impact has it made on you, having lived a very full life, having reached the pinnacle of a legal career? You have a little granddaughter now. How has that impacted your life as well, in terms of the personal side of your life?
It gives me a lot of optimism, I would say. When I see my granddaughter, every time I see her, you know, it's the future, it's the youth, it's the optimism, and of course you will now understand that I love my granddaughter. Maybe because I have only the good sides of being a parent now, but for me that's the future. That's hope, and somehow, in the way I contribute with my colleagues to release decisions on the future of this country, I'm thinking of her and the impact that decision will have on her life eventually. So that's positive.
Thank you so much for agreeing to this interview. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.